How are you? How am I? I'm really relaxed. I'm so relaxed. It's part of me doesn't want to talk at all. I just, it's like so much of my life is spent in practice and solitude, but also so much is spent bearing witness to the suffering and the great potential of others. And a great deal of my life is spent thinking. Thinking, you know, the great gift of the prefrontal cortex and the great curse of the conceptual mind. I just came off a lot of travel. I went to Mayo Clinic for my big physical checkup, and it was positive. I'm still here. I lifted out of Phoenix and flew to Japan and immediately began a month of the most extraordinary and intense teaching, travel, interacting with people in the Buddhist community there, teaching at the Heiji Monastery, kind of breaking the glass ceiling in a very conservative institution. I did notice how good the gender balance was last night in terms of the lineup. I always appreciate it with such unusual art as last night, but anyway, I will talk with the boss later about the issue. Being in Japan was really important for me because it gave me a chance to be in the direct experience of the field of the lineage that I practice in, which is Japanese Zen, and to see the extraordinary depth of beauty in a culture that values harmony. And every stick has two ends, as you well know, which is what my book is about. But then I left and went to Seattle and jumped into a talk in a bookstore about my book, and I had the pleasure of holding the physical book in my hands for the first time. It's beautiful as a physical object. I'm so grateful to Flatiron Press for honoring the literally decades of work on the book, but also 2 years of intensive writing and deep looking by producing an object which is beautiful. And I think the insights will serve many of us because it is about how we can maintain great strength, also sensitivity on the high edge of the virtues of our human social life and psychological life, which include our experience of altruism, empathy, integrity, respect, and engagement, and then plunging into the win-win of compassion. I'll talk more about that after we do a little practice. But then I went to Berkeley right after Seattle and had a wonderful interaction at the Bay Area Book Fair with Dacher Keltner on the book, and then turned tail and came here. So I can tell you, Ram Dass, thank you for encouraging me to return. This has been, I'm sure many of you feel the same in terms of your experience, therapeutic to say the least. So I'd love to thank you for showing up and ask that we begin this session with some practice, if that's okay. And so if you have notebooks in your hand, or even a copy of my book, and if you don't have to wait till this afternoon to buy the book. I actually urge you to buy it as soon as possible. It's edgy. And it quotes you, my dear. I've included all my friends in it and a few of my adversaries. Yeah. So let's begin by taking this in-breath, really gathering our attention into the breath body. And on the exhale, drop into the full body. And on the inhale, this letting our attention rest on the inhale allows us to let go of all the external busyness, the distractions, and dropping into this physical body. Gives us a chance to become much more grounded. And again, deep breath into the body. Giving space in your torso, really letting the heart float in the space of the torso. Bringing the world into your subjectivity. Even as you ground on the breath. And in the body. And for just a few moments, let your attention shift to the sensation of your feet on the floor, or your sits bones on your chair. Feeling the support of this earth. Letting yourself get really grounded, so much love. And love is the way to come home to who we really are, which is supported by us being grounded, fearless, rejecting nothing. Accepting whatever arises in our subjectivity, in this moment-to-moment awareness, and letting ourselves be grounded. No matter what we have faced or are facing now. breath deep in the body. As we allow ourselves to rest in the sensation of our feet on the floor or sits bones on the chair. And our attention is so easily attracted just to the sound of an engine turning over, or a bird, or someone shifting next to us. And it's not to turn away, but it's to gently let our attention rest just in that sensation of feet on the floor, or sits bones on the chair. And from this base of being grounded, from this foundation of connection with this earth, bring to mind some being, whether it's a person or a pet, or it could be a place where suffering is really present, whether dead or alive. Have been your grandmother, could have been your dog, your spouse, your child, a friend, a patient. Just from this perspective of sensing or grounding, opening to, yes, suffering is present in this world, and bringing someone, some being, some place, specifically into our awareness, or maybe ourselves, as a way to cultivate bodhicitta, this awakened heart. About being truly beneficial to others and fundamentally unselfish and loving and caring. So as we bring this presence in, like on the in-breath, bring it in fully, allowing our spine to be strong, strong back, our stability, our equanimity, our flexibility, strong back. And in this process, soft front, heart wide open, deep compassion, strong back, soft front. And as we sit with this one who's suffering, to allow ourselves to be infused with not only concern, but the deep aspiration that this one may be free of suffering. May you be free from suffering. And it's like on the out-breath, sending metta, loving kindness. May you be free from the causes of suffering. And in the in-breath, take in the truth of their situation, which on the relative level is fraught. That's still a reflection of reality. And on the out-breath, send great heart, well-being, mercy. And notice if you don't want to do this. Like it's too early in the morning, just not up for this. Bring the truth of that in, if that's your situation. May you be safe. May you be peaceful. Strong back. Soft front. Breath deep in the body. No fear. No death. And whatever moment of well-being, of peace, of great kindness you may have experienced in the past few minutes, please offer it to the one whom you are practicing with right now. And in this sort of exhale of mercy and exhale of blessing. Thank you for your practice. So I was in Bhutan in 1980 or 81. I don't remember which year, but it must have been 81. Ram Dass and I had met this amazing Tibetan teacher, Chagdu Tulku Rinpoche. Remember, we were asked to do a fundraiser for their community in southern Oregon, and for Chagdu Tulku Rinpoche and Gyaltsen Rinpoche. And these were totally cool guys. Very kind of radical, interesting teachers. And though I had the opportunity in the early 70s, like RD, to hang out with Trungpa Rinpoche, cough, cough, and have, you know, adventures in that community. Kind of get a big buzz off Tibetan teachings. In fact, I was a Zen person since the mid-60s, but Tibetan Buddhism really touched me because of its deep emphasis on bodhicitta, this cultivation of an awakened heart of great compassion, so that we could get off our self-centeredness and understand and realize directly the benefits of loving others, of working, serving, to end the suffering of others to the extent that is possible. And RD and I met these two very cool tulkus. It was life-changing for me personally. I began to practice, particularly with Chagdu Tulku Rinpoche, who was very interested in the work that RD and I and others were doing in the end-of-life care field. And the Tibetans have done a remarkable job in their yogic practices of exploring these intermediate states of consciousness, really through direct practice realization. And that was brought to our attention in the 70s through reading Evan Wentz, his book on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and of course Bob's work, Bob Thurman's work, and then being, you know, in the Trungpa mandala, and then these cool tulkus called us into their mandala, and I got hooked. I really wanted to study closely with a Tibetan teacher instead of being just only a kind of pure Zen person. Well, there's no such thing as a pure Zen person. I want to clarify that. So Chagdu Tulku Rinpoche became a deep teaching resource for me. And he encouraged me to go to Bhutan to meet a close associate of his, who was His Holiness's great teacher. And that teacher, who was in Bhutan at this time, was named Khensi Rinpoche. And he was mostly in this southern area of Bhutan. He was the Queen of Bhutan's teacher, and he was also very connected to Chagdud Rinpoche. So I went. You know, I'm not always disobedient. So I went, and very excited in Thimphu to have crossed paths with Rinpoche. It was the first time I'd met Mathieu Ricard. His mom was also there, who's was a fabulous woman. The only two Westerners there, and they invited me to come to a ceremony that was happening in a place called Phun Suling, where all of the different empowerments were woven into one macro ceremony. And I thought, wow, I could get the whole banquet, all the ingredients in just a few days. So being spiritually greedy, I went. And at a certain point, because it was overwhelming, you know, first of all, I had no real translator. Second of all, there were thousands of tulkus there, and the whole place was just kind of brimming, redolent with, you know, sort of energy, and all these little cards of deities were being passed around, and food, and I understood nothing. And I was completely bewildered, and I ran into Mathieu, and I said, Mathieu, I would really love to have an audience with His Holiness. And Mathieu arranged it, so I went into the little bungalow where Devo Khenchen Rinpoche was. And, you know, I said to him, listen, this is, I'm a Zen practitioner. I feel the kind of field of this practice and process, but frankly, I don't know what the heck is going on. And what should I do? And he shared with me a practice called Tonglen, sending and receiving. And I was completely blown away. I thought, this is just mind-boggling, not as a kind of magical practice, but how it completely deconstructs the ego. How taking suffering into our lives, being open to the truth of suffering, when we bring it in from a place of fundamental openness, of emptiness, of non-stickiness, and let it dissolve into the vastness of who we really are, of what we really are. What arises naturally on the exhale is this deep compassion which is boundless and non-referential. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then he said, translated by Mathieu, if you do no other practice for the rest of your life, this practice will bring you freedom. And I was like, whoa. So I decided to get into the program. I'm like all of us, I know freedom is possible, even in the relative world. And so I wanted to create the kind of internal architecture where that possibility had some possibility of arising. And not to say it has arisen, because even His Holiness is a wonderful example, gets up every morning at 3 a.m., the Dalai Lama does, and practices. That it's a moment-to-moment process. It's not like, you know, you just get one big hit and then you are free. It's much more this experience of constantly being in the now, turning ourselves toward just now, recognizing also, and having the skill to recognize when we are out of now. some skill. So the little practice I did this morning, just now with you, is a kind of variation of that practice. I do it in, many different forms, but I've tried to locate it within the breath so that every breath, in terms of my conditioning now, at some level, is taking into my subjectivity the truth of whatever is arising, not only from the absolute perspective, the ultimate perspective, but from the relative perspective, including the truth of our great difficulties: grief, hatred, confusion, disrespect, ego needs that we haven't even recognized, bringing that into the extent that I can, using those experiences which arise also within me as a way to melt or break apart the quality of defendedness of my fear around my heart, so that when that breaking open or melting open happens, what is liberated is this quality of mercy, is this experience of boundless love, is unconditional and non-referential care, is this impulse that we call concern. In other words, we also have, from the perspective of relative bodhicitta, a concern about the suffering in the world. We're not turning away from the truth of our insane and complicated political situation, or the truth of climate change, or the truth of 6.5 million refugees talking about, walking each other home. How do we walk 6.5 million refugees home? How do we bring them into our subjectivity so we really foster the conditions that make it possible for all of us to be liberated from different kinds of being a refugee, but particularly those who are super vulnerable. So this is a powerful practice. It's not avoiding the truth of suffering, but it is using the truth of suffering to alchemize our capacities toward radical inclusivity. I see I have 7 minutes left. Anyway, they've got me scheduled for a bit more. Yeah. So I was really happy that they gave me this first session so that I could kind of seed this into your consciousness as one of the ways that we can actualize no debt, no fear. Because when fear is present, when the meme of terror is basically seeded into global consciousness by, for example, the corporate world, the news world, where this is in our pre-conscious mind, it produces harm on every level of existence. And it's why this retreat we're doing, for me, is so timely and so important. It is not to turn away from however we are manifesting our fear, but it is really about turning toward our fear with great curiosity, allowing our fear to actually teach us, and to awakening to the fearless within us. So actually, I miscalculated. I have a little more time. I have to finish at 10:30, so sorry. I was fearful for a moment. Oh, is it 10:15?
10:45.
Oh, 10:45. Oh, okay. So what I'd like to do, I've written this book, Standing at the Edge. And I'm not talking about the edge of the swimming pool or the edge of the ocean shore, just dipping your toe in. I'm talking about the kind of high and risky edge, where you can see the entire landscape of both suffering and freedom from suffering. This is what I think wise people do, right? And compassionate people. Finding freedom where fear and courage meet. So the book is a radical exploration of these virtues of altruism, empathy, integrity, respect and engagement, and also the shadow sides. Because what I've learned, and I think, Paul Gorman and Artie wrote a book, How Can We Help? It's such a totally cool book because it is, in a way, the first generation of work on how we interfere with ourselves as we're aspiring to be of deep service to each other. So what I'd love to do, so my book is in the field, if you will, the good field, with current neuroscience, social psychology, and also, big narrative thread around issues and strengths related to how we serve. So I'd love to open up the field for questions. I can rap forever, but it's much more fun for me if I know what's up for you. And I don't know, Mike, if we've got mics. Oh, great, we've got mics. Fabulous. So we have a question back here. And would you say your name?
So, I have two names. My Hebrew name is Eliyahu, and I have an English name, Elliot. Anyway, my question was about Tonglen, in that I have been inspired by this concept, and I've never actually done it. I've tried to receive the suffering of others, and it just seems to fall dead. I don't think I really do it. Maybe you can tell us how you do Tonglen.
Well, Trungpa Rinpoche, when he was describing Tonglen, said that we have to do this genuinely. So maybe it just falling dead is a really good thing for you to work with, because that's like suffering too. What Trungpa Rinpoche wrote about was when he was young and in Tibet, he, in the place where he lived, he saw some people beating a young dog to death, and he couldn't stop it. And he was so shocked and so alarmed that it penetrated completely into his heart. So what he used in terms of the generation of this kind of deep aspiration to end the suffering of others was that memory. As terrible as that memory was to him, it was a powerful resource, a way for him to touch into the truth of suffering, the truth of cruelty. And for many of us, our most undefended relationship is with our pets. So sometimes, working with your old dog is a good pathway in. But I'm curious. I'd like to hear just a little bit more about what moved you to want to do this practice, Elliot.
because of my personality, I often notice people get hurt just when I'm being what I think is just a New York Jew, and people take offense, and they feel suffered. So I actually don't want them to suffer, but I also don't want to let go of my integrity. So I notice I try to say, okay, don't suffer just because I'm a New York Jew. And then they do anyway, and I just feel there's a limit to my compassion. I feel it's partially their problem, maybe not, but that's just the way. I just don't take on all their suffering. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you for sharing, Elliot. Ramdas is going to be talking next session. I think he ought to, address your situation. He's, But I wanted to say, one of the first steps is to recognize that you're harming others by your style of interaction. That's already got you to first base. So that's really good. And also, that recognition is coming by you not feeling good about it. So that gets you to second base. Now, how do you get home? Or, at least you're heading toward third, which is, the third thing is your aspiration not to harm others. So great, you're on base 3. You got 3 things going for you. So yay. Now, how to come home. And I'm glad you're here. Was that helpful, Elliot? Say what? Is it short? Okay, be careful.
In India, studied the law of karma. So someone's house burned down who didn't like me. So I said to them, the wheels of justice grind excruciatingly slow, but exceedingly fine. And they were terribly offended because they thought it was mean in that context, which is the way it was intended. But I noticed I'm not totally regretful that I said it because I felt they had some karma coming.
Okay, well, let's see how you feel about that on Monday. If there's kind of a shift in your perspective. I'm not going to go there right now. The wheels of justice might grind a little faster. No. Thanks, Elliot. We appreciate your transparency. Yeah. Is there a mic? Every time I say mic, I'm talking about Mike Crawl, it's just like...
G'day.
Okay. What's your name?
G'day, my name's Maverick.
Hey, Maverick.
Just wondering if you've had a medical near-death experience where you've died and come back. And we talked about in yoga that the 7th chakra is the concept of knowing.
So could you link those two for me, Maverick?
So many times I notice that people talk about processes or a practice, and Bob Thurman said, I'm okay with practice, but I want to see the performance. And in the performing of dying, there comes a knowing. And so I'm wondering what that knowing is and what that looks like.
Well, I think that's the theme of our retreat, actually, Maverick. Yeah. So as many of you know, I was married to a psychiatrist named Stanislav Grof, who is known for his work with LSD. And the work that we did was using LSD as an adjunct to psychotherapy. And Stan's work, deep work, both in Prague and also in the United States, was a kind of mapping of transpersonal experiences, but also the experiences relating to reliving our biological birth, which involves a death and rebirth experience for most people. And when biological birth is not characterized by stress for at least the infant, there seems to be tendencies in individuals, for example, who are born by C-section, according to research in Stan's work, that they kind of missed out on something really important, which is what, in a way, you're pointing to. Now, that work that Stan and I did, excuse me, blew my mind, as you can imagine. I had been a medical anthropologist at the University of Miami School of Medicine. I saw that the most marginalized population in this big county hospital where we were teaching and working were people who were dying. And that medicine at that point, even though Dame Cecily Saunders had set up St. Christopher's Hospice, and in '72 I got to spend some time there, but it was an experience of seeing not only mature clinicians, but also medical students completely not prepared for the truth of one's mortality, and making a lot of problems for themselves and others in relation to this. But also as an anthropologist, I had in Africa, prior to marrying Stan, witnessed a rite of passage that takes place once every 53 to 60 years, and saw an entire culture in this African context go through a transformational process, a rite of passage where the culture dies and is reborn. And it blew my mind too, because I recognized that within our experience in the West, rites of passage had been sublimated into war or dangerous behaviors, but there was no sacred context for their manifestation, which enhanced the development of character for us as human beings. And this work that Stan and I did, using high doses of LSD to facilitate a psychomental transformation in dying cancer patients, was really powerful. So, yeah. I think we're seeing, in a certain way, the outcome globally of the absence of rites of passage. I think our consumerism, our cynicism, our hatred, our deep fear, which is, fear is just trying to define and defend the ego, and the destruction that is being experienced at the planetary level, is something in part that arises because we've not gone through this character transformation that happens in the experience of death and rebirth. Almost every dying person we worked with in the LSD project had a completely different view of death after their LSD experience. But this wasn't just sort of randomly dropping 600 mics. Stan and I and the whole team did really deep preparation with the people who were dying. And we did deep aftercare work, if you will. And of course, the day of the session, it's usually at least an 18-hour day with eye shades and earphones and deep support. A real sacred context had been created, so set and setting are very important. And it was, I think, culture changing. And what is kind of cool is that work continued. Ahmed is experiencing a resurgence now. And maybe that work would not be necessary, or maybe it would be more instantiated into the social fabric of Western culture had we not abandoned rites of passage within our social context, within our culture. So people who have been through near-death experiences often have a completely different vision of what it is to die. People who experience kensho or spiritual awakening, who move into states of awe, they have a different view of what it means to die. Yesterday, Raghu read to me a really powerful communication from one of Ram Dass's brothers who's dying of pancreatic cancer, Ram Giri. And it is death is awakening. And I look in a way, no matter how messy and problematic death is, but it is, if you will, the ultimate frontier of awakening. It offers us the most powerful possibility. And it's not that awakening itself isn't messy. It is messy. And it is high risk to awaken. But it also has the potential for bringing a completely new heart to the world. So again, I'm here because of my love for my buddy, and also it's really healing for me to be here. I'm like an evangelist out in the world, not trying to convert people to LSD or Buddhism, but also because I feel so grateful to have survived my life, if you will. Anyone else feel that way? And to also be offering, based on my real experience, not just reading in books or sitting on a cushion, having subjective or intersubjective realizations, but from the failures that I myself have experienced, and to feel this kind of deep hope. I mean, hope is an experience of accepting radical uncertainty. And looking at this as one of in terms of the whole arc of human history, this has got to be the coolest time to be alive in the world if you have the great good fortune to be in a somewhat healthy human body, in a somewhat healthy state of mind, state of heart, and also to have had the good karma, good fortune, to not be in an environment where bombs are falling. And I feel that it's a kind of imperative. We should not get too lazy around our privilege. We should break out of the bubble of our privilege and use the gifts that we have been given in this life to truly end suffering in this world. Now, we can do it. And I'm grateful that we're jumping into how important it is to touch into the potential of no death, no fear, here and now. Thank you for your question. And Elliot, take note. Yeah, so here.
Thank you for being here. I've been working for about 20 years with people suffering from extreme dementia. And I just wondered if you could talk about, because, because their mind is...
Wait, what's your name?
June.
June has been working for over 20 years with people suffering from dementia.
Right. And I was wondering, it's so interesting that the body is staying alive, but the mind is dying. And there's so much fear behind that. And I just wondered if you had experience with it, or any guiding words or suggestions, or anything.
Well, it's not to give advice or suggestions, but I think you ought to play Krishna Das in the unit. I'm serious. I'm not being nice to Krishna Das. What we're learning is that people who have cognitive impairment are cognitively different, if you will, respond in a way to music. And KD's kirtans I feel as though they heal all of us, whether we think we're cognitively impaired or not. So that's one thing that I just don't want to mention. But I'm going to ask you, what have you found helpful?
Ram.
Ram.
When sitting with them and just staying as present as possible. That's all I know to do. There's something about me that they often think they know me. There's something about my face or something, I don't know, where I'll walk in and meet these people for the first time and it's like, where have you been? So then it's like, you're hired. And there's grace there, I think. And just to stay as present as possible. And I think I overdo it in that I'm always trying to lighten it up. And I think sometimes it's better just to sit with it and be as present as possible.
Thank you for your work. Wonderful. Ram. I'm reminded of some words from Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, a mutual friend of Ram Dass and Frank and mine. She says, helping, fixing, and serving are three different ways we see life. When we help, we see life as weak. When we serve, when we fix, we see life as broken. And when we serve, we see life as whole. Helping, fixing, and serving are three different ways that we see life. When we help, we see life as weak. When we fix, we see life as broken. But when we serve, we see life as whole. June, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. Where? Yeah, okay. Kate.
Hey, Roshi. I always have endless questions for you and answers. I was just recently with my father who was passing. He was an academic and extremely intellectual and convinced that spirituality doesn't exist and that religion's been the seat of all wars in time. And, just to his last moments tried to hold on to that belief. But as he was fading, which was kind of the last few days, and he was having kidney failure, and I saw him kind of expanding, and then he kept saying, and he actually said to Ramesh, right before Ramesh went to India, he kept saying, I see an edge. So that's why I was interested in the edge. Like, is there anyone who will help me over the edge? And it was almost like he was looking horizontally because he was really afraid of letting go into an expanse where he couldn't be in control with his mind and his thoughts and his ideas. And actually, I think Ramesh said, yes. He said, does your guru help me over the edge? But I just wondered how that, I haven't read your book yet, it's on my way from Amazon. But if you've ever heard of anyone say anything like that edge around their dying process.
Yeah, it's so, loss. So, years ago, Ram Dass and I were teaching a retreat on death, dying and death, and he told a story where he used the phrase, I think it was in relation to your father, death is safe. Is that with your father? So that's someone. Anyway, one of my associates, her father was dying. And falling over the edge, actually, most of us are over the edge in cynicism, skepticism, depression, anger, burnout, all of these fraught states, including the edge of being so attached to what we think we know. And relying, it gives our ego a sense of satisfaction on facticity, so to speak. And I never met your dad, but I heard he was a great person. And a really, in a way, very smart person. And in a way, a kind of wise person. And I think what dying does is it makes us realize how futile being smart is. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's a nemesis. And if we've relied on being smart, like so many of us Westerners have, and all of a sudden the unbinding is happening in the dying process, or as we're losing our cognitive capacities, or our kidneys are shutting down and we're in an altered state because of auto-intoxication, and we can't figure it out. We aren't used to allowing ourselves into this experience of freedom from certainty. So cool you did what you did, Ramesh. Yeah. So the edge, in a certain way, in this situation, is coming out of the flaw of smartness, of being reliant on conceptual knowledge, and pulling ourselves up, or being pulled up, or being driven up by virtue of our illness, of our breakdown, to the high edge of being able to perceive the vaster landscape of who we really are. So dying can give us that. And also, just a word can turn a dying person. Like, for example, the story of the death is safe. Her father was dying. He, like your dad, was smart as hell. He was terrified of dying. And she sat with him and she leaned over and said, "Dad, death is safe." And he threw the line off the shore of life onto the boat named Death is Safe. And he went home saying again and again until he died some day or so later, he never stopped saying the mantra, "Death is safe, death is safe, death is safe."
Thank you. I mean, in addition, I think it might have been Ramdas who said also, death is not an insult.
That's beautiful.
He was more insulted by it, you know, like, oh, come on, can I not conquer this one? Can I not get another degree that's going to keep me from having to do this one? It was really good.
You know, it's also kind of undignified. I mean, it's, you know, there you are. Your bodily functions have to be more or less dealt with by other people. You often have to be fed. You know, you lose your sense of agency, and it becomes this amazing, if you're in the right set and setting, so fortunate, opportunity for realizing you are who you really are. You're not that. Yeah.
Thank you, Roshi.
Yeah, Kate. So one more question, and then our time is up.
One over here.
I think the mic is going into, what is your name?
Charlene.
Hi, Sharon, we talked yesterday.
We did. I attend planned deaths in Oregon, and I was wondering, since this is happening, it's already legal all up and down the West Coast, and Hawaii just passed a law allowing medical aid in dying. I was wondering what your view of that is.
So, it is really powerful to look at the issues around hastening death. And I actually am grateful that we have options. Often extending life isn't even allowed to be an option. It is simply extended by virtue of what our medical system demands. So life has been extended artificially, and often as a blessing, and equally often at great cost. Not just financial cost to the well-being of an individual. And so allowing natural death, AND, is something that is rather difficult to provide the context for in our society because of our fear of death. But in terms of accelerating that process, I think that the kind of deep discernment that the medical profession, the dying person, and the family members enter into around hastening death speaks to the value of that possibility in our lives. And Frank, who will be sharing some sessions, he's got the stats down. How many people opted for hastening death and how few actualized that option. But I just want to tell you one short story. So the people in Oregon got hold of me and they asked me to consult with a woman who wanted her death hastened. And this woman lived not in Oregon, it was before the laws were passed in Oregon. She lived in Berkeley. In Berkeley, which has so much going on, but she didn't have what she needed in Berkeley. So we began this telephone conversation, which was some years ago. And in the process of the conversation, I learned she was blind, that she lived alone. Yes, she did have cancer, And she really wanted to have her death hastened. She saw no reason to live. She had no meaning in her life, no purpose, no connection. And the last was what was really the most significant. She had no connection. She had no friends. She had nobody to talk to. And I will only say this because, thinking about the work you do, June, and also, Kate, what you provided your dad. Connection is where it's at. There is so much loneliness in our culture. Reading some editorials recently about research, the loneliest generation in our history is the current generation of young people. Our digital devices, which are about hyperconnectivity, so often separate us from each other. I'm into them too. I have my, iPhone, my iWatch, my computer. I'm not saying that I'm a Luddite at all. By the same token, the experience of really connecting with people. I'm not so good at parties. But one-on-one, in the right circumstances, is completely where I come alive. So I think one of the things that is important is not just, oh yeah, we can hasten death now, it's legal. But is more, how do we give life to life, which is also legal. Okay, thank you.